Good evening and welcome to the Social Newsroom. And today, much like the other episode that we had, we're looking at the state of the nation. But we're wearing political hats today and unapologetically with two gentlemen who have a lot to lend to the political landscape in the country. And I don't know if they'll tell us who they, strategize for, but they have a mind of their own. These are brothers that I have interacted with previously, and I'm really glad that, gentlemen, you have joined me. And it is going to be about the political crisis and whether there really is a political crisis. So let's chat here. You see the live link. Engage with us. Let's keep the conversation going as we look at where we are as a nation. And ladies and gentlemen, I do not know if you've seen a sample of the headlines, and I don't know if Doris can just patch that on the screens just for people to see, because that kind of gives you a snapshot of where we are as a nation. You can give me a thumbs up once we have it, because the headlines, if you've just flown into the country, you would definitely have a good picture and snapshot of where we are as a nation. Now here, Taifa Leo, this is just this past week, kimeturamba. Taifa Leo pia, Raila aruka mtego. Then the Standard, the fear factor. The Standard as well, just a few days later, hustler agenda takes backseat as talks begin. Sunday Nation revealed Ruto Raila secret talks. And you have in the middle there that headlining page, Olusegun Obasanjo. I believe now we have it, what I'm talking about. Then we also have the Star, fresh hurdles hit Ruto Raila talks. This is just a snapshot of where we are politically, and that's what we're calling it State of the Nation. And one of the questions has been political crisis. Is there a political crisis? Or in the first place, what political crisis? Gabriel Muthuma, he is a governance expert par excellence. And thank you so much, my brother, for joining us this evening. First time on the Social Newsroom.
Yes.
Mark Bichachi, not a stranger to many people's screens as well. He is a political analyst. And yes, gentlemen, first of all, is there a political crisis from where you sit?
Mark, let's look at the situation. So let's look at Parliament, for example. In Parliament, we've got the minority and majority side, right? Much of the minority is minority only in name. In fact, the deputy whip works for the majority while complaining about being removed from being a minority. It's comedic. The reality is, if you look at the meaning of the word politics, it means life. So question, is there an issue with how life is in Kenya? Yes, there's an economic issue.
Yeah.
Now, the thing that happens, and I've said this times above now, what usually happens in life is when the socio-economic issues congruent with the political desires of your politicians, then you have an issue. So the issue is this. For you and I, there's pain at the petrol station. There's pain when you're paying your electricity bill. There's pain when you're buying sugar. Now, that pain is transferred into the political arena. Now, in that political arena, do they feel the same pain we do? No. They are in GK cars, they've got nice pension and salaries and things like that. However, there is a political problem in this country. What happened? Number one, we spent 4 years in very acrimonious campaigns, name-calling and whatever. Then we got into a government that was seen to be very vindictive. Yes. For example, our deputy president said, if you didn't vote for us, back of the line. And we saw it happen. They fired people in the thousands simply because they did not support this particular coalition. What does that do? It creates a sense of, are we less Kenyan? It becomes Animal Farm. Some animals are more equal than others. And when that is happening, you are fermenting a crisis. Yeah. But where things came to a head politically is when Kenyans were agitating and complaining against the finance bill. Yeah. And then what happened is they saw both the majority and minority in parliament not speak for the people. Now, why is that important? It is important to remember that 99% of the revolutions that happened and dethroned monarchies in Europe were about the economy and, number two, representation of the people in parliament.
We saw the Arab Spring.
Yes. So the issue is this, that if today we did not have economic problems, and if parliament, not forget about William Ruto, forget about Raila Odinga, if parliament was seen by the people to be defending the desires of the people, that if Pasaris, when she went to vote, voted with the people, we would not be where we are. So that's what the crisis is. It's economics, it's politics, and then it is a parliament that the people feel they cannot trust to represent them.
So there is a political crisis, and you've given the context. In your view, what crisis is there?
Well, Mark, thank you. You know, I'm now talking with Mark and Mark. So, I mean, Mark has put out a good context
Yes.
in how things or how he sees things. And there are a few things that I would agree with him. But, you know, as much as context is important, so is the subcontext. And here I mean about the things that we see, things that we know about, which we can point to. But then, you know, in government, there are so many things that we may not be aware of.
Okay.
Or even if the common mananchi is not aware of these things,
Yes.
does not mean that they don't exist. So here you have a situation, and for you to understand when somebody says there's a crisis, you must point to what crisis are we talking about. If it's the economic crisis that we are talking about, go to Geopol. It will tell you where the world is currently.
Yeah.
And when you talk about the pump pricing, you have to ask several questions that are leading to where we are.
Yes.
But more than that, Mark, is how have we gotten to an inflation that was 7.9, and then today, or starting or beginning of this month, the same inflation has now come down to 7.3. And now many people would ask, what have we gone on? What have we done to come to 7.3? Those are the questions I think that's the debate. That's the narrative.
Right.
I think we should be pushing. So is there a crisis? It depends on what you point at.
Okay.
For instance, we started out by saying, oh, there's a crisis in unga, in food items, in the pricing of how, you know, things, food commodities. And yes, on one end, you start asking, how did we get here? COVID notwithstanding, and what we saw, the disruption of imports and what have you. But climate change also notwithstanding. The mere fact that Mark Bichachi will tell you where he comes from, the rains did not, you know, happen. The rainfall was
Delayed
not, yes.
or failed.
People from the mountainous region, they will tell you the very same thing. Nearly every person, every farmer will tell you there was a problem. So you start asking, what must be done? Yes, we know the issue about the fertilizer, that, you know, but now we have the rains. What do we expect? Every person, every self-respecting farmer will tell you, we expect a bumper harvest. Would you look at that as a crisis? Or would you look at that as something which was precipitated by forces that we have no control over? So it is the same thing about the fuel prices. I was asking myself, what should we do? Who should we blame for the fuel? Can we blame really the president because he closed the taps that were giving the subsidies for fuel, knowing fully well even the subsidies that we are saying we are subsidizing, that money was not given to the marketers. So that is counted as part of the debt, and the debt continued to grow. So when the president comes in and says, guys, first of all, the first bleed we have to stop is borrowing. So Mark must say we are left asking, why can't we not borrow for the next 1 year just to ensure the things that, but then in the back burner you realize, even if we borrow for the next 1 year, that money has to be paid, and it has to be paid with interest. Then all of a sudden, somebody comes and tells you, let's not borrow now, let's tie our belts a little bit tighter, and I'll show you what will come out of it. No, this is delayed gratification. We can choose to continue borrowing, or we can say, let us just tighten our belts, let us shift things here and there, let us cut some of these, like the trips.
Yes.
All these ministers, you are being told somebody is going with an entourage of 30 people, with hair salonists, they don't know, with massage, whatever. You're told, we need to cut on this wastage. If you're having 4 cars, we need to allow you only 2. Because we know we can cut this amount. And then this is how we are able to, across board,
You've spoken
assist.
You've spoken a lot about the economic, and he seems to be speaking to the narrative of what was inherited was a mess, a total mess.
Right. And the reason why I'm so agitated is because there are some things that are factually inaccurate. Number one, this country has borrowed 1.3 trillion, okay, in the period under consideration since the new government came into power. So the so-called tightening of belts in terms of what has happened between now and a year ago, not true. Second, when we say we are tightening our belts, we have a budget. That budget has a deficit. So I guarantee you in the next 12 calendar months, we will also borrow. Okay? So, and the thing is that I struggle with is how we want to give an economic narrative that is not true. Because when you talk about austerity and you look at how much budget was given between the presidency and the office of the first cabinet secretary or whatever it is you want to call him, 800 million shillings was given for vehicles. Is that austerity? These are facts. Google them. There is a difference between telling Kenyan people that we are tightening our belts when we are actually not. Because what has happened, and when we talk about inflation going down, also not true. Because inflation is cumulative. It is not instantaneous. So when you say it was 7.9 last month, it is 7.3. No, it is 7.9, 7.3 today of what was 107.9 of last month. So, listen, you know, let me finish. The truth is that this country is in economic pain. Now, granted, the whole world is in economic pain. But remember, the reason you choose leaders is to handle crisis. There is no way you are a father in your house. Then you go home and you tell your kids, listen, sleep hungry today because my boss had a bad mood. It does not work like that. You figure it out. That's what leadership is about. The buck must stop somewhere. Okay. Now, this idea that then if you speak about the economic issues in a real sense, then you are anti-government is not true. Because if we are going to fix our country, then we must diagnose our miasma correctly and prescribe the right medication. Burying our heads in the sand and saying the globe is like that, that's how things are, that's how the previous regime did, it cannot work.
We inherited an empty...
Listen, when you marry a wife, when you're vibing her, you can tell her, yes, your exes were bad and I'm the best. When you marry her, you cannot start telling her, listen, I would have given you a better orgasm, but your ex messed you up. That's what we are being told as a country.
All right. I like where he goes.
You like the analogy?
The orgasmic. So, this is where we started. And the game of numbers is very good to understand it. I can guarantee you Mark has not sat with anybody who has the real numbers. I did. I had an afternoon
how did
with
you
the
guarantee?
current, because I know you haven't. I had an afternoon, nearly 6 hours, with the current Cabinet Secretary of Treasury. And I wanted to know the numbers that Mark has been saying. Let me tell you, Mark, the movements that happened with the kind of borrowing that happened in the past 5 years was gigantic. And let me shock you on
The
this
economic
thing.
movement?
Yes.
Okay.
You had to look at what was borrowed domestically. And in fact, he may not know, we never had a problem with our foreign debt. That was not the issue. The issue was with our domestic debt because it was through haphazard borrowing. Now, there's something Mark probably doesn't know, and it's called the economic degradation process. If you ask him to tell you what that is, he may not be able to tell you, but he's quick to say what I alluded before was not based on any facts. And here I'm giving you raw figures. Our major problem continued to be our domestic debt. That's why it was very hard for you to go to a local bank and you get money based on a good interest rate, because we had fashioned it to borrow domestically to even pay for salaries. Who does that? So the economic degradation process really does not start last year, did not start last year or the year before. In fact, what happens is it is something that happens over time. And you may actually be having numbers which look and appear as if your economy is doing good, but your economy is hurting. And when you remove the veil, you realize, wow, when you look at what you've imported vis-a-vis your exports, you realize you have a major deficit. So sometimes it was actually even better, and Mark does not know this, it was better to borrow from outside than domestically.
Mark, do you care
No,
to say something?
I'm trying to educate Mark a little bit on the economy because he has said,
Let him have a rejoinder.
Wait a minute.
10 seconds.
He had said the numbers,
were not correct, were not accurate.
That we borrowed 1 point something,
1.3 trillion. Yes.
That is a facade. That's a lie.
My friend, you know.
That is a white lie.
Do you have a fact checker to Google for him now and put it on the screen?
And
how easily, it's been covered by the papers.
How easily you can do that? It's like you telling me, if the cabinet secretary treasury has not talked about it, and you need to know the borrowing. When did that borrowing start? Yeah? When did it start? You know, that's the other thing. Just because somebody has gotten money which was coming anyway.
Just hold on.
Right.
You know, Gabe.
And it's easy to throw numbers. That's what I'm telling you. It's easy to throw numbers. What do you know? There are other things in terms of goods that you get.
Right.
That is counted as debt. For instance, the oil marketers, how much money were they looking from government? Wait a minute. How much money were they expecting government to pay them? The oil marketers. Just look at the oil marketers alone. And that amount of money, whether you like it or not, they posture it as debt. So when they come and say, oh, this government borrowed, it is actually items that were gotten before even they came in. And that's why, that's the balance. That's the balance I want Mark to get.
Just hold on.
Yeah?
You know.
Read for me what you said.
Gabe, let me tell you something, right?
No, you read for me.
First, in a debate, you can never know what I know. Okay?
Why can I never know what you know?
No, because it is very insulting, I'll tell you, to say that I don't know.
Because you'd have said it.
No, I said, for example, Kenya has borrowed 1.3 trillion.
Between when and when?
It's right here. He's showing you.
Listen, first result, how Ruto borrowed 1.3 trillion in 9 months, the Star. Okay? And there are very many of them articles to the same. Listen, Gabe, I worked for 4 years in export promotion. Kenya,
because I have the same facts.
Kenya exports. No, I've showed you.
No, you also, I have the same facts. In fact, mine are coming to from a place. Anyway, let
me finish my statement, Gabe.
Go ahead.
You've worked for export promotion.
I've worked under export promotion for 4 years. And I happened to work for the Treasury for 8 months. Okay? So let's talk about local versus domestic borrowing. Okay? Today, as we speak, okay, what is the percentage that Kenya Kwanza is offering for 3 months bonds? Right? It's 13%. Previous regime, was getting away with 9 to 8%. So we are borrowing more expensively today, locally, than we did before. What we are doing today...
Which can be very well explained, but I'll explain it to you.
But I'm just showing you things I know, because you are assuming I don't. The point is this, and let me bring this to now the political reality.
Yeah.
Political reality is this. There are people who, like Gabe, will admit that Uhuru's government had a problem, but Ruto's government has none. Okay? Then there is a side of politics that is saying that this country where we are, given the indicators we have, given the finance bill that has been proposed, we will be worse off in a year than we are today. That is the issue. Now, if you feel that the finance bill as it is good for the country, then you're on Gabe's side. I sit on the side where I believe, forget the past, forget everything else. Where we are, if you look at the domestic borrowing percentage, if you look at the international borrowing projected, if you look at the trade deficit that we're talking about, Kenya is not in a good place. But also, there are those of us who are saying, because we pay bills, are saying that the economy will suffer because the ability of the Mwananchi to buy things has been reduced, not just by dint of having extra taxes he needs to pay, whether it's a housing fund, whether it is more taxes in terms of salary being taken, whether you're a businessman, it is turnover tax, whatever it is, your spending power is reduced. But at the same time, forget just about the cost of fuel landed. We've also increased 8% of internal tax on the fuel. So we are saying that you are reducing the purchasing power and you're also increasing the cost of goods. And that has nothing to do with the international market. It has to do with the finance bill 2023-2024. And that reality is where the political divide is, where people, some people of Gabe's persuasion are convinced that there is no problem, what we are doing is right. Okay. And we are saying that even the problems you're claiming to solve in terms of borrowing, you're still borrowing. If you're claiming to solve that you are cutting expenses, you are not. We've seen people like Mudavadi go to a country we cannot spell and we export nothing to it. So which trips have we reduced? Which trips?
Again, Mark, how do you source for new markets? But one thing I'll agree with Mark is, yes, we are not in a good place.
Yeah.
That one, I'll give it to him. But yet again, for you to actually underline that we are not in a good place, and here you can underline that word twice, you have to tell or you have to discuss with people how we got there. You see, Mark, the problem we're doing is saying we arrived. How did we arrive? How did we get here? What led us to where we were? And that's why I told Mark about the economic degradation process. It takes time. And key among the things that makes an economy degrade is haphazard borrowing. So we are not here by accident. We are talking about some things that were done that were not right economically. Okay. Okay. But now, I mean, that's a topic I know we cannot exhaust by discussing. But one thing I would, again, agree with Mark is, yes, the pump pricing is hurting everyone. But you have people who are celebrating, people who are using LPG gas.
Yes.
It's gone low. So the question I ask, why has this one gone low? What else can we do to ensure that we are able to replicate the items and commodities that are going low? What have they done for us to be able to do this? And that's why I'm running away from this word we call, we're in a crisis. Yes, probably when COVID hit, we said, yes, we are in a health crisis. But you had people who burned the midnight oil to ensure that we are able to sort out this malady. So the question is, what do we do now? And key among the things that have been able to, you know, to be put in way, if I may use what they've actually done a lot to ensure that they are put in chambers that can be managed.
Yes.
Mark said about, and again, this is something we can exhaust. He talked about the interest rates on the bonds. Yeah, okay. it was a 9%, but still you had probably so many people who are still finding it hard probably to get into that kind of an arrangement. Most of the people...
Are you saying it's easier now?
It may not be easier now,
okay,
but I want you to look at some of the things that were really so endeared to the microeconomics. And to me, that's what you need to change. Okay. And that's why when you look at people who have $1 million, $2 million to do the GOK bonds, they are very few. But when you look at the people who are using Fuliza and Mshwari, so many people, the interest rates were on the roof. Compare that to the Hustler Fund. And that is why you saw deliberately, immediately President William Ruto came into power. Most of the telcos, including one that we know very well, their first meeting that they called was to do what? To lower the interest rates on Fuliza and all those other money services. Why? What had they been doing 4 years, 5 years prior? Did they not see a problem at that particular time? Knowing fully well that Mama Mboga was actually paying hefty. And God forbid that they are unable to meet that obligation of being able to come even with the house. It was getting crazy. The interest rate was shooting nearly to 300-400%.
But,
so if you...
But there wasn't anything illegal with what...
No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
It wasn't. So. But here, no, it's not illegal.
Yeah.
But here, I'm talking about...
Because you
Mark, can I
kind of dangle the Hustler Fund.
If you look at the legality aspect, you're going to actually play a major disservice on other things which we consider not through the lenses of legal versus illegal, but what is right or wrong. And that's why somebody can say, hey, I can sell my unga for 600. It's not illegal.
So he's saying you move from bonds
to Hustler Fund. And this is the kind of games that we keep playing. And this is exactly what Gabe is saying is the reason why we have a political crisis. Okay. It's because when you start chasing a rabbit, they tell you there's an antelope there. Let us be clear. The fact is this: bonds are totally separate. Yeah. Bonds are government instruments for borrowing. Yeah. Fuliza and Hustler Fund are things that are for personal borrowing. So let's talk about personal borrowing. Okay, let's go there. Okay? This person, civil servant, has a houseboy, or a home manager, has a shamba, has a side hustle. This government contributes 30% of our GDP. What do I mean? If our government spends 3 trillion, our national GDP is 10 trillion. That's 30%. When salaries are delayed, okay, it has a ripple effect. That's part one. Part two is everybody's paycheck is going to be reduced starting tomorrow because the finance bill has been cleared. Okay? Now, this person, this civil servant, who his take home is 50,000, his salary now is reduced, is probably going to come to 44,000. Now, he will go to borrow. That Hustler Fund, he will borrow how much? 500 to 1,000 shillings. Whoop-de-doo. Thank you very much. 1,000 bob, we can all retire. Is that what we are saying? No. The Hustler Fund has not addressed the pain of any Kenyan. Yeah. None. So,
not to look down on the amount, 500 to 1,000.
But you see, the reason why I'm saying that is look at the court case around Hustler Fund. When you make your savings, which account does it go to? Because it has savings. When the money is coming, the 50 billion, which pot is it coming from? David B said it's not government money. But in the budget 2023-2024, there's 10 billion assigned to it. Who is the CEO? Where is the board?
There's actually
where
a board.
is the bank account?
There's a board.
Board never took office. It was suspended.
No. They're already in office as we speak.
It's a court case.
I'm telling you.
Unless they're in office illegally.
No.
The point I'm making.
No, there's a placement for the board.
Guys,
in terms of
do you know the
operationalization.
Hustler Fund is operational? Do you know people are borrowing and returning money?
I did not say.
And now we are actually going to the second phase.
I did not say it's not operational. I just said it's not solving any problem.
challenges
It is solving.
Listen, all I'm saying is this: that the reason Kenya is in crisis is this exact conversation.
No.
It is in crisis because Gabe is convinced that Kenya Kwanza is doing an excellent job and the budget 2023-2024 is fine.
No.
Some of us are convinced, we are not. Now, let me address the political issue.
Yeah.
10 seconds and I give it to Gabe. The political issue here is also a malady we've refused to solve. We are a country that does not talk to each other. We are a country that assumes political leanings are an enmity. And number three, we have never addressed the issue of how often political losers, and I'm calling them losers, feel election after election. It is something even the president himself, his first letter to parliament, addressed. There is also an issue of those who lose elections, and I'm not talking about Raila, I'm talking about everyone who votes for him, feeling like they are second-rate citizens in this country.
Because of loss or because the second in command has said?
No, because there's also communication from everyone in that sense. And that political pain is something that we've not addressed in this country. And if we don't, it will continue to be a wide schism between the people who are perceived to be the winners and the people who are perceived to be the losers.
But that sounds like it will keep Kenya in a perpetual cycle of you first have, you get past the competition, the political competition, you have the winner, the loser, and then you have to somewhat baby the loser. Don't people move on or lick the wounds?
No, you see,
I'm just speaking as, just refereeing this conversation.
Mark, our major problem is, after every election, we have to be put into what I call a political heart. And I'm not talking about the heart, I'm talking about the political heart, the traditional house, where we are tasked against going, or where people are told, the narratives change. Powers that may be tell you have to work against the Constitution. Because if we were to get outside the parenthesis of Constitution, it would then mean we don't need that Constitution. We don't need to be a democracy. All right? We've had this issue of we go for elections, people vote, 50+1, that's what our Constitution says. After that, if you're not okay, there are institutions that have been created to listen to your grievances. We go all the way to the highest court in the land. They actually bring back a verdict. They say this is it. But you still have people who will not accept to those merits. So you are left wondering, what else can we create that will satisfy people who lose?
Do you think that is where we are, and that is why we're asking if there's a political crisis? Because he's pointed out a problem within our political culture.
Yes.
And it's not whether it's a bad or a good thing.
It is
what it is.
That is where we are. It can only become a crisis, if we agree it is a crisis. And the remedy thereof will be to work outside the Constitution. Because we have been brought here by the same Constitution. It is a Constitution that says, you go to an election, this is how you win. Once you win, whoever loses, blah, 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 these are the merits. These are the areas you need to satisfy. You've satisfied everything. Going to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has come unanimously and said, no, what you're giving us is hot here. This is the person who won. And he is validly elected. But you say, no. He is not validly elected. He There was theft. Oh, no. Oh, there was a whistleblower. You see, it is an environment which we have created away from the Constitution. Now, here you have a president who swore, who swore to protect the Constitution. In fact, that's why the whole ceremony of swearing in is. We are witnessing you say, I will uphold da 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 da, I will da 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 da, and at the end of the day, I will protect the Constitution. And then after that, you said, we don't recognize your legitimacy based on what a whistleblower said, not because of the evidence they are inducing or they induced in court. So the crisis we may be having is created if we have one. All right? Maandamano to me is not a crisis, if that's what you're directing us to. That's not a crisis. That is somebody engineering anarchy, and it has to be called out as such. Period.
Let me reiterate my point. The President of the Republic of Kenya, Dr. William Samoei Arap Ruto, wrote a letter to Parliament addressing issues he felt needed to be dealt with. Okay? One of those issues was recognizing the opposition.
The leader of the opposition.
Yes.
And he didn't do it as he was president. He, Chatham House, even before he became president, he talked about the office of the leader of opposition.
Let me finish my statement. Before this new constitution, what used to happen is the people who lost an election, including Uhuru Kenyatta, Mwai Kibaki himself, and many others before them, you would find them in Parliament with a shadow cabinet holding the government to account. In our current system, you have today Opiyo Wandayi, no disrespect to him, but if I showed Opiyo Wandayi's picture to someone on the streets of Nairobi, they would not know who that is. He unfortunately does not represent the desires, the passions of the people who voted at the presidential level. Now, we borrowed a constitution from the Americans, granted. But the Americans had a cure. The elections are phased. Okay? Governor Ron DeSantis, who wants to run for president today, if he fails to get the presidency, and if he fails to be nominated, can continue to be governor. In other words, there is a cure. That's number one. Because one of the things we must understand is we must create a vent, a political release for the people, and I'm not talking about the leaders, for the people who feel like their representatives do not have the wherewithal in the instruments of how we govern our country to be able to not even articulate their issues. That is number one. Number two, we also need to reduce the government's ability to buy our legislators. We have had stories during Uhuru's time of how legislators were paid 10,000 shillings to vote a certain way. If we do not create a strong opposition that then the people feel, because our country seems to have elections that are 49, 48, 52, 51. If we do not give this 48% that loses an election, because I'm not talking about legitimacy or illegitimacy, I said lose an election. If we do not give them opportunity to feel like they're represented, to feel like their agitation matters, then you will constantly find yourself in a country that is angry and at war with itself. And if we remove in our minds the idea that this is about William Ruto and Raila Odinga, then we will be able to see correctly that this country needs to give space, accommodation, and legal instruments for the opposition to be well represented. And you cannot tell me Opiyo Wandayi or even worse, Sabina Chege represents
on that
people.
office, Mark, I'll 100% agree with you. I was among the people who are pushing for more powers to the office of the leader of opposition. And I agree with Mark, sometimes it is many people don't understand that we came so close with numbers, but we lost because of this and this and this, and our guy is out. That one I've always understood. But the problem is it cannot be cured unless we agree on certain parameters within our constitution. That's one thing, Mark. That's just the honest truth.
Can I ask if the arrangement politically that we were actually in studio when it happened, the handshake,
yes,
much as it's probably not envisioned in the Constitution,
yes.
was it unconstitutional, but it's something that led to settlement?
Well, you could argue it led to something, some sort of, and I think this is where the current president calls it a mongrel. Nobody knew what it was. All of a sudden, the people who were in the opposition, they were making decisions that were in government. I mean, who can forget when the cost of living, people are yelling everywhere, the cost of living. And it was the Honorable Raila Odinga. The same thing he's talking about today of the cost of living. When people asked him that, and I remember you actually captured it in his house, and Honorable Martha Karua was seated next to him. When he was asked about the cost of living, what did he tell people? No, cost of fuel, oh, these are external factors. And you guys, muache kubweka. You know, he's remembered for those words because he felt he was within government at that time. All his political ducks were swimming in a row. And so it would be actually offensive if you were to say or to tell Kenyans, let's have another handshake. I don't think that's the cure. If you are telling me to really face the ultimate solution, Mark, which I believe is wholeheartedly, this is where the solution lies. Back in the day, Mark, during Moi's time and probably Kibaki's, when you lost an election, the one thing that used to come to mind, Mark, oh man, our area will be so underdeveloped, we won't get roads, we won't get what. Devolution came to cure something. I really hope we would have understood, or I really pray that at some point, Mark, we are going to understand what devolution is all about. Because the Constitution guarantees that this area cannot be left behind. And those even who are left behind, there's a chunk of money that is entitled to them. So there is one huge aspect of underdevelopment, you know, that was cured. The only other thing that now we are fighting to cure is creating a crisis to point to the Constitution as having a constitutional crisis. Because that's the only thing we can do. If you tell me that what we are having can be cured by President William Ruto having another handshake with Honorable Raila Odinga, then I'll tell you, then President Ruto was the biggest liar because he told us the handshake back then was a mongrel, that in fact all major issues started when there was a handshake. And to an extent you can point some of the things which probably would have not gone on had probably Honorable Raila Odinga been in an office where he's able to veto some things directly using his members of parliament. And that's why I'm agreeing with Mark. So if you get another handshake, this person enjoys government, who will hold government to account? You see, and that's why I'm saying that is not the cure per se. Okay. If you are saying if you're telling the framers of the Constitution, get the likes of Akina Mark and other people to say, how do we craft this office? How will the new office of Honorable Raila Odinga in Parliament look like? That is a conversation I think Kenyans may want to have. But run away. Let's give chance to this document, which the same very person we are talking about fought for it. Why can we not allow it to work? If we believe that the institutions that were created, the Supreme Court, all these institutions that were created by this Constitution, if we so much believe in this Constitution, why are we not going to allow them to work? That in every place you lose, you must point fault at that very institution. Yeah? Well, with Mark here, when people are sleeping in the streets after 2013, 2017, same thing. Move these guys out of office. Bring in new people. New people come in. You still lose. Change the people in that office. Put this back. So we've not cured anything. But I would agree with Mark. If we are having a narrative, if we are having a conversation where we are saying, how can we have this office of the leader of opposition given much power to put the government of the day in check, even to an extent of calling cabinet secretaries and their PSs? That is something Kenyans actually can be grateful for. And I think if we are so dear to this great country that we love, those are some of the conversations that we should be having.
You know, we must be clear that in this constitutional holiness that we're trying to pursue, there is today in this country the office of a prime cabinet secretary.
Right.
It is not a constitutional office.
Correct.
It exists. I have no problem with it because I supported the idea of having a prime minister long before. So I don't switch positions based on who is in power. Politics is the art of what is possible. That's what politics is. The United States, which arguably was one of the first countries to have a constitution, amended that constitution 2-3 years after, right? When you realize there is a problem, the constitution itself envisions that the people who are sovereign, either through their representatives in parliament or by referendum, can express themselves.
Yeah.
Let us not treat the idea of amending our constitution as inherently evil. That's something we must change. At the same time, we must also remember that President William Ruto, in looking at his government and his political future, appointed 50 CASs, who the courts deemed illegal.
Yeah.
Right? That process, what was it? It was a political process. We as a country need to stop hearing the other side with a bias. We need to stop looking at the problems of this country as though they're snapshots frozen in time. We need to think 20, 30 years ahead. And 20, 30 years ahead, the issue of 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 vote will be a big issue. It will be a big issue because the population over here in Central is underrepresented, whether you want to count by MPs or in terms of funds they receive. Completely underrepresented. I am not a Kikuyu, so I'm not defending my people. The issues of devolution, for example, the amount of money allocated to devolution versus national government. Let's look at the housing fund, 1.5% going to national government, yet housing is a devolved function. These are the issues we need to discuss without looking at them as though it is enmity. The other thing we need to agree to is this country requires leaders who speak peaceably, not only to each other, but to this country.
Okay.
When we live in a country where a cabinet secretary can use words I can't use, we are heading in the wrong direction. Because what we are doing is we are creating an enmity culture.
Yeah.
And at some point, what we say will turn into what we do. Those are the issues we need to address.
Okay.
Forget about the political colors we want to put, oh, who's sponsoring Mandamano, or this person, or that person. Stop individualizing the problems we have in this country.
You know, Mark, I think we've had many instances where we would have corrected so many things. When the 2010 Constitution was being promulgated, I remember I was not with him, I was somewhere else in a Western capital, and people were actually talking about the peace that had prevailed in the last term of President Kibaki, that you had a prime minister, and it appeared okay back then. And people are questioning, why didn't we continue, or why didn't we structure our constitution
to accommodate that?
Yeah, back then. all of a sudden to realize that the proponents or the people who would have pushed that office, they did not want that office to be present because they thought or they felt they were so close within the ranks of power and hence did not need it because it would usurp some of the powers. The same thing we are told came all the way to 2017. So it's not that, or it's not like we have not had a chance to write some of the things within our constitution that would require us to go to probably a referendum and be able to write some of the things that we are talking about.
Yes.
And I would agree with Mark, if you're looking at what they say, the oldest constitution of the United States, it has been amended so many times. If you can remember the words of the former president, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, many years ago. But when were they implemented? Or when did we start seeing change? Yeah. We only had the first black president just a few years ago. So it tells you, even if it could be in paper, Mark, we also need the spirit of the Constitution to be alive and well. Okay. That people will be grateful for that there is cohesion in what this Constitution will bring forth. Okay. If it has not brought anything forth as we speak, the conversation should be, how should we go about it peacefully to ensure that nobody is feeling prejudiced, or you feel somebody is throwing at you so much gab that you need to change something nearly by force. Okay. Because the Constitution allows us to be a free country. But freedom, as we talk about it, you had so many people just the other day, if I was to give you an example, many legal scholars were finding it very difficult to interpret Article 37 of our Constitution that talks about peaceful and unarmed demonstrations.
But in your view, you've said it because what the point we're trying to get at is what is seen as a political crisis that has to lead to talks is choreographed, is cosmetic.
Of course. Because at the end of the day, you cannot create an environment, then suggest ideas on how to quell that environment that you've created. At some point, you must allow a way, and Mark, you have to agree with me, that's why I thought the bipartisan talks was a very great platform. Would have achieved more if we allowed to be in an environment that is peaceful, where people are talking with each other vis-a-vis what we saw. And here is why I keep saying, Mark, you can never see chaos, or rather, chaos have never produced order. They will never. You can't, and here when I say chaos, I'm really not talking about violence.
Revolution?
Yeah. No. I'm even not even in the revolution realm. Yeah. And here I'm not talking even about violence. I'm talking about a systematic rearrangement of things.
But revolutions, that's how they're...
most revolutions are bloody. Unless you're telling me there's a revolution that has been carried without a coup,
Sri Lanka is a good example. They walked into the presidential palace and kicked out the president. It was not violent.
Yes.
You wanted that example. I'm just giving you that example. But the point I wanted to make is this. Our Constitution envisions the president to be a symbol of national unity.
Right.
There is a constitutional responsibility on the president to literally reach across the aisle. One of the mistakes we've made in the last 1 year is we've not reached across the aisle. The words, the actions that we've done to each other. Look at Jubilee. Jubilee has been sponsored to be taken over, literally from government, right? So that is not an action of peace. And I'm saying that without fear of contradiction, because that is what has happened. But what is critical to understand is, I think, for once, people are giving Raila Odinga more credit than he deserves. Hear me out. He came with the narrative of elections have been stolen. Kenyans didn't react. and kudos to Kenyans. He came with the narrative of William Ruto is illegitimate. Didn't work. Okay? Because Kenyans have grown up. If today the cost of living in this country was going down, we would not have Mandamano. And I have said times above number, you may think you're doing the right thing in as far as this economy is concerned. But that does not mean you should not listen and respect the people who disagree with you. I think we are where we are. And Raila may be the figurehead of it, but I do not think he's the mastermind of it.
Who do you think is a mastermind?
The people. Because if you looked at social media and analyzed the protests that was there, because now let's talk about peaceful and armed. Look at the protests on social media about cost of living, about the finance bill 2023-2024, about how people feel that the economy is not headed in the right way. 75% of Kenyans. When you look at those numbers, then you realize that Raila is riding on a horse that is not of his own making. If we are going to be genuine with ourselves, we need to address two simple things. Number one, listen to the Kenyan in economic pain. Number two, solve the constitutional problems that make this Kenyan who feels in pain feel like Parliament does not represent him. That is the solution.
But do you agree, first of all, that all this political, stall is choreographed to meet personal ends?
Remember why I started, Mark? I'll remind you. I said, politicians will always take an economic situation and use it for political ends. That is the combination of politics. What the people want, meeting what the politicians want. That is how it works. Now, by no means, I do not think there is a saint in Azimio or in Kenya Kwanza who's going to save us from our doldrums.
Okay.
What we need to do is to keep agitating as a people to force those who claim to represent us to accurately represent us.
Okay, you did say that, and I want you to respond to this as well, Gabriel, just to answer this question, because it's been in the headlines, that the leader we need needs to have or to be the symbol of national unity.
Yes.
5 days ago, the president said and tweeted, "My friend Raila Odinga, I'm off to Tanzania for a human capital meeting to harmonize the expansion of employment opportunities in our continent. I'm back tomorrow evening, and as you have always known, I'm available to meet one-on-one with you anytime at your convenience."
And then
Credit given to him.
the reply that came is, well, where's niongelesha kwa Twitter bana?
But that is national unity.
Yes.
Yeah?
No, not only that, Mark. I mean, there was a time these two leaders met in Yao Stadium. The thing I want us to run away from is this creation, and I don't know where it came from. I don't want to say it's the media that created it, but it was created somewhere, that these two individuals, or these two great leaders cannot talk. They have each other's numbers. They can really, Kwanza probably, I believe on speed dial, you know. You have also to look at them historically, where they've come from, whether you're looking at President William Ruto as a member of ODM, whether you're looking at President Uhuru Kenyatta in 2002, when, the presidency went to Kibaki, him and the current President William Ruto were left in the cold. So you are talking about a friendship that has been created over time. But I would also hate to believe that they cannot talk to each other. I mean, I would highly want to dissuade anybody who would think that these two great leaders cannot, or three leaders cannot talk.
As it's been in the headlines, do you believe that
No, I
talks
don't think
have
so.
happened?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And if they were to ever meet and have a discussion, I had the leader of majority saying, if it's having a conversation with Honorable Raila Odinga, let it be in front of people, because if we are talking about the things that are ailing Kenyans, for instance, the cost of living, and that's why I think this is what you call creative suffering. The cost of living, really, I was, again, discussion about cooking oil, and Kenya being really nearly a net exporter of such a commodity. What can we do? Whether you're looking at industrial sugar or cooking oil, what can we do in the meantime? Because we don't set the prices. Mark, we really don't. So when somebody tells you, importer XYZ adjusted their cost because they cannot run a business through losses. You have to adjust. The shopkeeper here has to adjust their prices. It's only given. And that's why you hear people saying, oh, the global food prices. That's why it's not a Kenyan problem. Okay. We have just found clever politicians who have made it an agenda as if Kenya is the only country that's suffering from these issues. So anyway, to finalize on what you asked, I think, and I really believe, President William Ruto meant well with the tweet that he tweeted. And if he was to invite Honorable Raila Odinga, what would be the conversation? That's what Kenyans want to know. Would it be anything to do with a handshake? Because many people, when they hear handshake, their ears become red. Because I would honestly not want there to be another handshake which did not solve anything, you know? I would also not want us to create, like the president said, another mongrel where you do not know who is running government, whether the government is in opposition or the opposition is in government. You have no idea. It confused so many people. Yet at the same time, you have common 190 saying, man, you rode on everything that was against the handshake. So you cannot be the first person to do this. So I can understand why the president is also tied in to try and stick as much as possible to the constitution.
And as you answer, as a political analyst, why is one side, especially Azimio, quick to say the talks have taken place, and the other side, especially Kenya Kwanza, no such thing has happened?
You know, we must understand and position this conversation correctly.
Yeah.
The fact is that commodity prices are going up.
Okay.
But the fact is they're going up even more because they're being taxed more, right? So that's one. And there is, if you look at the agendas that, if you look at Kenya Kwanza, leaders are saying, oh, look, it was never about the cost of living, it was about jobs. And then Azimio is saying, no, first agenda is cost of living. Why is this a critical sticking point? And why are these leaders waxing hot and cold about whether talks have happened or not?
Yeah.
The reason they're waxing hot and cold is because, number one, the president himself ran on a no handshake basis. Number two, Raila Odinga has sung himself hoarse saying he doesn't want a handshake, right? In fact, quite crudely saying that he would not like to shake someone's hand in the presidency. So we've got two politicians who have set up the stage of not having a handshake. But let us pause for a minute and ask ourselves, what does a handshake mean?
Yeah.
One of the biggest problems I have with our collective memory as a country is how we like to politicize things so much that we don't recognize what they are. Gabe has correctly pointed out that when Kibaki and Raila had a joint leadership of the country, not only did we have one of the most peaceful times, we had one of the most prosperous times. In terms of our GDP, for the first time, grew beyond 10%. I remember I was in studio when Uhuru Kenyatta did a handshake with Raila Odinga. And I remember the environment and the tweets and the messages and how the studio felt, and we were reading tweets from across the country, how Kenya breathed a collective sigh of relief.
Okay.
What happened later in terms of the fight between now Uhuru and Ruto is completely unfortunate, because it is that fight that we are dealing with now. I want to say that I have supported handshakes from 2007. Will support them to date. And I'll tell you why. If you go read the comments when President William Ruto says, my brother Raila Odinga, I'm off to Tanzania, I want us to talk. If you notice how that statement brings temperatures down.
Yeah.
Handshakes are not about dividing government. They should not be. In the United States, and the last 5-6 years, since 2016, okay, it's more, 8 years, since there was this huge Democrat versus Republican fight given Trump, every time they have bipartisan talks, they go to the White House, and the Republicans say, we want these changes, and the Democrats say, we want these changes.
Yeah.
And they sit down and have a handshake about the budget, have a handshake about raising the debt ceiling, have a handshake about how the budget should be. Now that handshake, I do not understand why anyone has an issue with it.
Yeah.
It does not deter opposition from being opposition. But that conversation where two people who disagree come together to agree for the good of the country, I will support it till the day I die.
Right.
I will not buy into this political narrative that when leaders who were political rivals before talk, it is a bad thing. It is the reason why many counties, including the one I was born in, Gabe, projects are stopping in Nakuru. Why? Because the current governor doesn't like the former governor, so the projects the other governor were doing needs to stop. It is childishness. It is utter childishness. And there's nothing wrong saying, you disagree with my budget proposal. What is your proposal? Can we come to a compromise?
Yeah.
That, my friend, I will always be on the side of that handshake, whether I remain as the one Kenyan against 57.9 million others who don't.
unless probably.
Would you support the same for what it represents?
Well, if you're saying that, first of all, I think we've demonized the handshake because of what it did in the last government. I told you when I saw the two leaders in Nyayo Stadium, they were shaking hands, they were enjoying, they were laughing, as the sport continued. You saw Manyala performing very well, we saw Faith Kipyegon and everybody else. It was a happy moment. So would you really look inside that and say that handshake meant something? Unless you're talking about a handshake that has a political narrative behind it. And I think that's what Kenyans don't want. But if you're talking about these two leaders sitting down, one has already offered an olive branch. You say, these are the things that you're having problems with. Let us set a bipartisan committee. And Mark is right. In the US, bipartisans, they will work. And I'll be the first one to admit that, for sure, dialogue is what changes things.
Right.
Dialogue anywhere changes things. The streets and demonstrations, you may think they will work, but hardly. At the end of the day, people must sit down and agree about civility, because that's the only thing we can't buy.
Right.
All right? Peace is the only thing. Once absent, nobody will win. Okay. So on this one, I would agree. The issue that most Kenyans that I know, would say we wouldn't want to see an environment that was there in the past, where, again, you do not know who's in government and who's outside government. I think that's what Kenyans may be. Because really, the accountability. Half of the questions that we are asking today were asked back then. And the answers were so different back then, primarily because somebody felt they were in government.
Yeah.
And to me, that's what worries me.
That's what we should avoid.
Yeah, that's what we should avoid. But if we are meeting, for instance, if you're talking about handshaking and talking to people, Mark will agree with me. The current president, he's been nearly to each and every corner of this country. And what is he doing there? Is he not communicating with people? Is he not doing handshakes with people? Those are the people who matter. Yes, at the end of the day, probably a leader would matter, yes. But the people who really feel the issues on the ground are the people he meets on a daily basis. He's been in the coast of Kenya. He went all the way up to Nyanza. He was talking with Nyanza leaders the other day about, I can't believe, was it capital fish? He was thinking about how are you still importing fish? Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Yeah. So those are some of the things that I feel we should be discussing as far as handshakes are concerned. First of all, do as many handshakes as possible with the people, those who elected you as well as those who did not elect you. Right. You cannot tell me, and probably for the longest time, as long as I live, I will have a problem, even though I know there's a solution to it, and I know many people may answer very different from what I would answer, that peace may be pegged on an individual. I fail to understand. And that is why somebody said democracy can only work if the majority of the population are educated. And that's why democracy and edification go hand in hand. Because the minute you're able to interpret things and say, no, this can work for us. This, we don't need it. I mean, if you guys want to have a handshake and be like brothers, so be it. If you want him to be your brother, so be it. There was a time the president said, if it takes me to call you my brother, I'll do that. In every sentence, I'll do that. So if they want to do something on the side, let them have a seat, let them have tea, let them communicate. But at the end of the day, if we are to be in line with our constitutionalism, then it is only good for this country that we are able to divorce the politics of the day, the development agenda, wanting to know what it will represent for the future of leader A, B, C. It would be more important, Mark, if the governor of Nakuru, both of them, are able to sit down in the absence and discuss what you're discussing. That people can see change. It does not matter who is the governor as long as he is able to do good by the people. I think that, Mark, that's the only way we will progress as a country.
All right. And so I want to ask both of you your word to Raila and your word to Ruto as you conclude. But ask you, and you can chime in, who do you think, besides Gabe, would be the biggest hindrance to a handshake? politically, on either side.
Politically
on either
speaking,
side.
the people who are a biggest hindrance are the people who are, I'm trying to look for a word, people whose tongues are a bit loose. Okay. People whose tongues are a bit crass. There is a political narrative that is so angry. It is so, the refusal of even having a conversation is not based on what is on the table. It is acting as if the people coming to talk are some form of chimpanzees and we are Homo sapiens. You can sense that. I don't want to mention people, they have power. I could be, I'm already in trouble as it is, right? Those are the biggest hindrances. The people, who do not speak peaceably, who talks are being talked about and then you're hurling insults the other side. That is a big problem. Now, to answer your question about my message to Raila, Ruto, and I will add Uhuru. My message to Raila is simple. You occupy a special place in the Republic of Kenya. There is no politician alive who has not sat in the presidency, who has as much to their credit and as much power as you have. I do not know of any other politician who can have the kind of influence Raila enjoys without being in office. But with great power comes great responsibility. The people of Kenya are looking to you to make sure that the president of the day listens to the people, not only that voted for him, but also who didn't. But also, you prevail upon him and his deputy to stop victimizing Kenyans because they didn't vote for them. Okay. My message to President William Ruto.
Could look at that camera.
Yeah. You, my dear President, need to do one thing. Accept and tell your fellow leaders to accept that you won. Like Spider-Man, you've been beaten. You now have great power. Don't use it haphazardly. The person who holds power and goes to the Shaolin temple to be taught how to fight is first taught how not to fight. You fought all your life. That's why you're called a hustler. But you're not a hustler anymore. You are the president of the Republic of Kenya, the single most powerful person. So your words, your demeanor, stop the fight. No one can fight you. You've won. Magnanimity, building bridges, and standing above the fray is what you, your deputy, and most especially Moses Kuria and his ilk need to practice. To Uhuru Kenyatta. To Uhuru Kenyatta. This is my message to you. Let no one take your political rights from you. Barack Obama campaigns for a very old man called Biden. Be free. Don't be silenced. Don't be cowed into people who are forcing you into retirement. Kibaki was old. Moi was old. You are your own person. The reason why you are given a pension and an office, office of the former president, is because we expect that your experience, your wisdom, and your input into this country will be valued. Jerry John Rawlings, the late, who had the privilege of meeting his family once, was such an influential leader during retirement that he once directed traffic in the middle of Accra before he passed. You are not absolved from your responsibility as a citizen of this country. And people who tell you to retire can call me, tweet me, and I will tell them to shut up or take a very long walk of a very short pier.
Mr. President, those are your misadvisors. But anyway, let me take us.
Yeah, you're going to give
not
the
yet,
message?
not yet.
Okay.
But let me take us
Okay,
to a
okay.
place where I hope that's the kind of prevailing energies that any person, any Kenyan would call for.
Yeah.
I'm taken back to 2008.
Yeah.
When John McCain and young Barack Obama then were running for president. And I remember it was in one of the town halls because at that time I was still living in the US, and this came as a shock to everyone. John McCain was an amazing guy. Forget him being a soldier or whatever. He had an amazing soul, and God rest his soul, you know, in eternal peace. One of the supporters wanted to ask him a question, and when she was given the microphone, I remember this vividly, and she came out and said, Barack Obama is an Arab, and went on in a tirade.
Yeah.
Guess what? John McCain reached out to the microphone and took it from that supporter. His supporter. took away the microphone. Do you know what he said? He said, I know Senator Barack Obama. He's a decent man. He's not what you've said. We have political differences. That's it. But more than that, he's a decent man. And he took away the microphone. You know what he did? He stood up for somebody who he believed had what it took to get into that coveted seat at the 1900 Pennsylvania Avenue. That is the kind of spirit that should lead our leaders. That somebody can stand somewhere and say, no, that's not the person I know. But when you are in a very charged atmosphere, you have your supporters around you throwing very bad words to a current sitting president. He's listening. They are calling him all sorts of names. But you cannot take away the microphone and say, guys, listen, I know this person. That's not how I know him. You guys don't know him. Probably read about him. That's what I would have expected from some of our leaders, some who are very senior.
Yeah.
And today, as we sit here, I think this is the kind of conversation that we should be teaching some of these guys who are coming, you know, out of the demon hole with such crazy and angry verbiage, whether they're in government or whether they're in opposition. I do not think it's right. It has never been, Mark, and it will never be, for anybody to chastise or call names. No, just forget because you think you're behind a computer and you think, you know, you're very anonymous. No. There are so many things you can say just because you feel you've been given some sort of freedom. Yes, Mark, I don't want your internet seized. I don't want your internet censored. But also, like Mark said, with greater power comes greater responsibility. You have the powers within you to write something to either hold somebody to account or really to destroy that somebody with angry words and just bomb them with inhumane words. The power is within you. Why can we not do the right thing? All right? So I think as we move this conversation to another level, we have a very big part to play, Mark, whether we believe or not. For instance, just this sit down, and I know many viewers will listen to us. What will be their take home? That you can go back to your devices and haul insults to the person of Raila Odinga or haul insults to the current president? And then what? I gave somebody an example. Mark Bichachi, this one you wanted to listen. I gave somebody an example. 60,000 youths within our East African community sat down on their social media to sell their country. Visit country XYZ. Visit country XYZ. Their GDP grew by 3%. These are young people who would have chosen otherwise to lime, because we are not, some of us are not even in the country. We can hurl abuses. But that's not what they did, because they understood how the domino effects of an economy works. They know that if this person visits my country, they spend in one of the hotels. My brother works there. They buy food. My mother farms vitungus. They understand the economics of our times. But here, we've made this environment so out of touch with reality that you have passenger cruise liners that are moving away from the port of Mombasa to the port of Dar es Salaam.
Yes.
Mark, we have to understand the challenges of our times. We have to create a conducive environment. I told somebody, we may not realize that we are cutting our noses to spite our face because we think what we are doing primarily is hurting the other person who sits at that house on the hill. Not fully well knowing that some of the things that we are doing are affecting us directly.
Right.
And up until such a time when we realize that our shoelaces are all tied, is probably the time we'll start thinking straight.
Well, just before you give your message to the fourth president, the current president, and the leader of opposition, if you may, or even you've already given to the public.
Yes.
There's something that Ruth Ameka has written, and you might want to respond to this, and you could jump in. Ruth Ameka says, Ruto was in that government that borrowed too much. Most of the people in Ruto's government were in Uhuruto government. They act like it is new to them that Kenya has overborrowed. Why was a government borrowing locally? Uhuru's government was also Ruto's government.
Well, that has been argued since the first time President Ruto came into power and said, you know what, we borrowed badly. We had projects that did not even pass through cabinet.
Yeah.
You know, but we have to realize the stakes that a deputy president has vis-a-vis how the treatment was. If we are to be honest again with one another, you will realize the deputy president has no much say when it comes to matters budget. After the organ making concludes, really, again, if we are to be honest, the control is within the realms of the presidency.
Right.
At the end of the day, that's why we do not talk about the presidency of William Ruto back then. We talk about the presidency of Uhuru Kenyatta, or the president himself. That's why he was saying, you guys, you'll hold me to account, which is very true. Yeah. Now, you have the current president. Who are we going to hold it to account? Not Mandrigiji. It is him. So he has, again, to align himself. That is why we always point fingers and say, Kibaki was able to do all these things. Yet, the same Kibaki was president, the late Daniel Toroitich Arap Moi, vice president. Why was he not able to have achieved what he achieved as president?
Can I chip in on this one?
Yes, please do.
If we want to be clear and honest, the instrument that makes budget, the instrument that we use to increase or reduce our borrowing is Parliament. Mm-hmm. Okay? Now, if you want to know who was against, who was for, don't ever look at what these politicians say in the podiums. When Kenya was increasing its debt ceiling, Tanga MPs were there. Azimio now MPs were there. What were they called then? Jubilee. ODM were there. How many of them voted against it? Who did William Ruto call and say, this thing has passed cabinet, stop it in Parliament? The truth of the matter is this, that if you listen to politicians talk about your economy in the media, in their platforms, you will think they're saints. Just the same way you will think that tomorrow, Kenya will not borrow. If you hear what the politicians are saying, what they voted for is different. You cannot absolve Kimani Ichung'wah, you cannot absolve Aidan Duale, you cannot absolve Murkomen. The truth of the matter is this. In the narrative of the economics of this country, our politicians preach water.
Yeah, they should drink wine.
Not drink, swim in wine. They're drowning in it.
You know, that one we have
marinating in it.
Totally. On that one I agree. And
yes.
you know,
across the board.
Yeah. That's why I said our politicians.
Yeah. So, and I think the point of convergence that we have, Mark and Mark, is that we have to have new lenses of how we look at this great country.
Yeah.
Somebody said that at the end of the day, half of the things that we are fighting for, our children don't even understand. It's our children who are going to the same schools. They are enjoying, they are playing together, the same playgrounds. Let us not take them with us to problems that we have refused to solve.
Right.
But if we have some level of skin, Mark, we will do our best to ensure that our children do not solve the problems that we started. The best we can do for them is to at least leave to them a nation, as Barack Obama subscribed, that we always look at a country as having taken it from our children, not our forebearers. If we have that in mind, every time we try to do something, we'll be asking, what will my child think about me? What questions will he ask when I'm gone? And if we are going to live true by them, we'll have two things. Either they'll come to our graves, kneel, put some flowers, and pray for us, or they'll come and spit on our graves. That one we have to solve. That one we have to solve.
All right. Your message.
So I addressed the former president, my good friend Uhuru Kenyatta. I will not, and I promise, I will not lecture you like Mark Bichachi has lectured you. I'll just give you wise words of wisdom. Your time came, you did your very best, you retired, and as you've said in many instances, you passed over power to the person who came after you. A great move, a great initiative. You lived as a true statesman and to the true elements of our Constitution. Let that be the legacy that people remember you with. These other issues of being caught in the crossroads of Maandamano and what have you, I don't think they really reflect you on a good page. You have been a great leader to this country, and I hope, I pray, people will remember you as such. Words sometimes, carried by leaders who've been there before, can actually have just same as those of our current leaders. It is somebody who said that from the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. So just remember, some of the things that you do say are carried with a lot of weight just because you occupied the highest office in the land prior. To our current chief of opposition, the Honorable, the Right Honorable Raila Odinga, you still have a part to play in this great country of ours. Nobody can take much of what you've done in respect of our democracy. People still remember you among other people who fought for this space. And when I say other people, I'm talking about the likes of Bishop Dingi Mwana Nzeki. I'm talking about the likes of Charles Robia. I'm talking about the late Kenneth Jindo Matiba, and a myriad of many other sons that this great country produced. May you be remembered and continue to be remembered as that. May you also be and know that you also have a place where you can create peace. And actually that should be your duty, to ensure that this country enjoys peace, that our children are able to attend schools away from the Maandamano, that our business are able to thrive. Let's face it, there are other people who don't receive a pension like most of you do. There are other people who actually contribute into the taxes that go ahead to pay to your pension. Kindly let us treat those people with the respect that they deserve, and please create a conducive environment for their businesses and their welfare. To our current president, yes, you are given the mandate by the people. You have a tumultuous task ahead of you. Key among is what my good friend Mark Bichachi said, that a symbol of national unity, as is subscribed in our Constitution. May you live up to that true meaning. Call each and every person who you feel will be able to add a mark within your government. Reach out to the other side of the aisle, as you have done in the past. And as you enjoy your magnanimity, kindly also remember that, again, the words I've used to our president, from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Have a great time, and God may bless you and also bless this great nation of ours called Kenya. Thank you.
In the same spirit, it's kind of hard to fill those shoes, but I have to say something as well as the host. And thank you, first of all, to the viewers for watching online. And also, we're going to have this uploaded. I'd like to thank Mark Bichachi for his time here, as well as Gabriel Muthuma, Gabe, as he has been called. Gentlemen, we will have you back here for a conversation. We do have town halls, so we'll definitely have you guys on for a town hall conversation with an audience, a live audience, as well as an online audience. So let me say this to the fourth president, the fifth president, and the leader of opposition. JFK has said, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. You've already gone to the countrymen and asked them to do something for you in one way or another, asking for a vote. In your individual capacity, what can you do for this country? It's larger than you. Life goes on even after you. So think about the future of our country in the choices that you make today. Thank you so much for, again, the team that made this possible. Thank you, viewers, and for the contributions that you've put here. We will be posting those ones, especially word to Uhuru, word to Raila, word to Ruto, from specifics, as well as there was some orgasmic statements made here. We're going to cut that and then put it there. We've been told that people are not preaching. You know, they preach.
They preach water and they swim in wine.
They swim in wine. So we're going to have those tidbits put there on our platform, the Social Newsroom, Summer Box. We thank the whole team for making this possible. Ladies and gentlemen, have yourselves a good night.